My name is Ryan Murphy, and I'm a former flight attendant for United Airlines and former council representative for the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, in San Francisco. I'm now an assistant professor of history in women's gender and sexuality studies at Earlham College, and I'm the author of Deregulating Desire, Flight Attendant Activism, Family Politics, and Workplace Justice. I think that the employee union movement among flight attendants begins in the best thing about the job and not the worst thing about the job, which is the fact that people are always gone. So flight attendants are on the road from anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks at a time. And you might in 1 week be in Argentina, and the next week be in Ghana, and the next week be in Australia. And at the end of the day, when you are travel that much, there's no such thing as coming home from a 16-hour flight from Melbourne, Australia at 5 o'clock exactly and saying, "Honey, I'm home." Instead, everybody's family relationships are what we might call non-traditional, right? And so because of that, people need specific financial resources to take care of the kind of kinship networks that they are in. So meaning additional money for childcare, benefits that are more flexible that might be eligible not just for a married partner, but for a domestic partner to which you're not married. So the fact that flight attendants are on the road, that they often married later, that we often live in same-sex couples, created the need for specific economic resources. And airlines, which their number one imperative in management is cost control, don't always want to provide those resources. And so that disconnect is where the movement came from. So the thing to understand about the flight attendant union movement is that it became much more visible and much more militant in the 1960s and 1970s, even though people had unionized back in the 1940s. And at the time, in the 1960s, most carriers required flight attendants to be young, single, white women. And those women lived somewhat unusual lives in that they lived in downtowns of major metropolitan areas like New York and Los Angeles. And in an era when middle-class white women were usually expected to marry, to have children right after high school in most cases, these women lived really different lives. Often delayed marriage, delayed having children. And then as the 70s came along, people often decided that maybe they were going to stay single for their whole life. Or maybe if they were going to settle down and domesticate and have a family, it wasn't going to be with a man, right? And so all of a sudden, as people were living lives that more and more deviated from middle-class family norms, they also were living in downtowns of major cities where the women's, gay, and lesbian liberation movement was taking off. And those movements were saying things about marriage. They were saying things about men's power over women in the workplace. They were saying things about discrimination against LGBT people. And those movements all of a sudden started to explain things, I think, for flight attendants about their workplace. So in other words, the critique that feminists were making, the critique that lesbians and gay activists were making seemed to explain why flight attendants made so much less money, for example, than the pilots and mechanics that they worked alongside. And so that synergy really led to actual on-the-ground activist alliances that created significant increases in flight attendant pay, benefits, working conditions, and respect on the job. And so